Balance of Terror was a mid-season 1 episode, an early example of what Star Trek could really do that I think is part of what helped to ensure its elevation from just another SF show to something unique. It helped establish that Star Trek had varied storytelling possibilities. Sure, there were the godlike beings and the swollen-headed aliens, but there was also a tale of mystery and tragedy in the conscience of the King, and the resilience of mankind in the face of certain doom in the Corbomite maneuver. And this as well. It showed that this wasn't just a weekly weird thing happening, but that they could just as likely be a serious dramatic issue because, even in space, humans are still humans with all the human drama that carries. Coming off last week's discussion of the quote about Gene Roddenberry's view and how contrary it is to drama, you might think, as I did, wow, how'd they manage to hold him down long enough to get this story on the air? It's got human bigotry, military-centric attitudes, humans' involvement in interspecies nuclear war. There's even a chapel where a woman is clearly engaged in religious behavior. So imagine my surprise when Paul Schneider, the writer, said, I sat there with Gene and developed it with him. Gene said, take it this way, take it that way. I've forgotten how many times I revised the story. Wow, unless the story started out as God ordering Kirk on a crusade and Gene whittled it down, I'm not sure how this could be reality. But thankfully, whatever happened, and we have this story, which opens with said chapel. Kirk is preparing to perform the marriage ceremony between the Hobbit and the Giant here.
Since the days of the first wooden vessels, all shipmasters have had one happy privilege.
Droit de seigneur! It's the reason I became a captain. But before the wedding can hit the good part, space cockblockers arrive and attack Earth Outpost 4, and we learn that they're near the neutral zone established between them and the Romulan Empire a century ago.
As you may recall from your histories, this conflict was fought, by our standards today, with primitive atomic weapons.
Hey!
And in primitive space vessels.
Hey! Led by a collection of mentally disturbed, intellectually challenged apes, whose basic inability to function is an endless source of shame for Starfleet even today. Hey! Well, okay, I'll give you that one. Because the war was conducted entirely with our eyes closed, no one has ever seen a Romulan before, and we haven't heard a peep from them since. But still, there's a chance for war if either side violates the neutral zone, and so the orders are clear. All these outposts and the Enterprise are expendable if it means averting another war. That's why we put these outposts up, after all. So if the Romulans cross the border, we'll know about it. We apparently won't do anything about it, but we'll know about it so we can shake our fist impotently at them. I'm starting to see where Gene had some input in this after all. With 2 outposts destroyed and a third now being attacked, the role of the Enterprise now is to avoid escalating things from blowing our stuff up in peace to blowing our stuff up in war. A fact that's complicated by the presence of Styles, who, despite this being a century out, is still bitter about the deaths of several members of his family during the Earth-Romulan War.
All lost in that war, sir.
Their war, Mr. Styles.
It's kind of a sad irony that when a war wounds us, our desire to avenge our loved ones can make us want to start the war all over again. It's one of those things where our emotions are so disconnected from reasonable thought that it becomes ridiculous. I'm so mad at this war, I can't wait to start the next one. But the mood is dark amongst the crew, except of course for the happy couple. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Tonight I'm gonna get me some. But arriving at Outpost 4 reveals the grim truth that 3 others were indeed destroyed, and this one's looking bad too.
Confirm what hit you, Hansen. What vessel? Identity?
Space vessel.
Okay, well, we've ruled out the world's deadliest catch. It is a spaceship in space after all. And right before our eyes, the ship appears out of nothing, blows up the base, and then simply disappears. But their technology isn't perfect. Spock can still find a way to follow them, and it looks like it's heading towards the neutral zone. Balance of Terror created a lot of the ideas that would later be integral to the show. The Romulans, the neutral zone, cloaking devices, and I think shaped the way the show handled starship combat, although Gene had said he was inspired by Horatio Hornblower, the most famous fictional naval captain whose name sounds like an ostentatious gay porn star. The thing that would differentiate the Romulans from other baddies of the week is illustrated soon after, as they managed to do in a few minutes what Earth failed to do for the entire war, get a picture of the enemy. That's not true! That's impossible! Yes, Spock. I am your father. No! The reveal, of course, is to show the Romulans are similar and likely distantly related to Vulcans, a problem with Styles since he already suspected there might be Romulan spies on board. Of course, if Spock was a spy, revealing the face of the Romulans, which would put himself under suspicion as well, is pretty unlikely, but Styles holds a grudge, and his animosity with Spock adds further tension to an already strained situation. Now that we've seen the enemy, the episode begins to show the events of this episode from their point of view, aware that the Enterprise is a ship despite Kirk's attempts to make it look like they're just a reflection. The Romulan commander observes Kirk's behavior and concludes it's the kind of tactic that he would employ, studying the enemy before the strike. But he's certain that they'll destroy the Enterprise if it comes down to it. But this is not arrogance, which is surprising given how Romulans are often portrayed later on. No. The commander says it with almost despair, that their victory is only going to ensure another war. It would have been very easy and probably expected to portray the commander like the Klingons would be later on, but instead they've taken this alien and humanized him, for lack of a better term. He's a man forced by honor and duty to carry out a mission that he doesn't believe in. We witness firsthand the brutality of his attack, but we are still compelled to sympathize with him because of this, and will discover that he'll use every trick and take every advantage he can, despite his wish that they will be destroyed rather than return home victorious. Meanwhile, Kirk's doing his duty as well, to stop the ship without igniting another war, a difficult balancing act for him. Spock briefs them on what they've learned.
Castrodinium. This is the hardest substance known to our science.
We obviously need new science books. Besides Styles complicating matters with his anti-Romulan suspecting Spock bigotry, the scene shows a surprising argument, with Spock arguing in favor of attack and Bones aghast at the pointlessness of this conflict. Spock, the voice of logic, argues for conflict, while the emotional McCoy wants to avoid it. Again, it's not the perspective I expected at all, but it is a good one. While I poked fun at Gene earlier on, the episode is a sober discussion of the topic. One cannot allow one's passions, like Mr. Styles here, to compel you to go off half-cocked and leap into a conflict. But you can't allow your distaste for it to lead into provoking an even worse conflict down the line because you're dealing with an unreasonable aggressor. Yet we cannot forget just what can transpire once things have moved into violence. While Voyager would give us pat anti-war statements right before blowing the shit out of stuff, this episode handles the topic with maturity, gives us all sides with their chance to speak without ridicule, and makes us aware of the seriousness of what's going on here. This isn't just another cheap shake-the-ship special effects yarn. The whole point of this is to show that the Enterprise is balanced on a razor's edge. It's against an adversary with a strong tactical advantage in both weaponry and stealth, while we only have speed as our advantage. And it's not just a question of the results of their battle in the immediacy, but the long-term effects of it. And to top it all off, they're 21 minutes away from the neutral zone, while it's 3 hours until they can expect a reply from Starfleet about what Kirk's orders are, meaning that Kirk's actions are going to have to be decided by him and him alone, and it's going to affect this entire region for years or possibly centuries to come, and he's got only a few minutes to decide how to handle it. And that's when he makes a mistake. He doesn't make the same assumption that the Romulan commander did, that the adversary was as clever as he was. So instead of catching the Romulan ship in his next move involving a comet, he winds up having to fire blindly in the hopes of catching the now lost ship. But there's a lucky shot. Oh, careful there, we only have the one set here. This is only the first of a long game of cat and mouse between the Enterprise and the Romulan ship. Balance of Terror is essentially a space version of Warship versus Submarine, with the cloaking device's abilities and limitations mimicking the sub, while at the same time being different. It's not a straight-up transfer, but rather using the real world to inspire logical extrapolations of space combat, though one element is particularly silly. That's why there are some similarities between this and some other works, such as Run Silent, Run Deep, a film about a submarine captain with a vendetta against a Japanese destroyer, and The Enemy Below, the film, not the book, about an American destroyer versus a German U-boat with a growing mutual respect between adversaries. But as we'll be getting into in a later video, there's a difference between ripping something off and drawing inspiration from it. In this case, Balance of Terror draws upon these kinds of conflicts, but brings it into the science fiction setting and building upon it to create something unique. So after some strategies and counter-strategies, both ships are in the dark and unsure of where the other one is. This is the point where the submarine thing really should have been ditched, because they're both being very quiet to remain undetected. That's literal. They're whispering to each other and trying not to make noises. In space. Now, maybe if you wanted to be super ooper duper generous, you could say that their scans picked up something with a vibrating surface indicating that there was activity from inside, sure. But then anything doing that would be like a submarine emitting a ping to find something. You're giving yourself away by trying to find them. In any case, Spock inadvertently makes too much noise so the Romulans on the next set over hear them. I think that's the most reasonable explanation. But before that, we get a wonderful scene reminiscent of the one from the cage where Pike had considered quitting. He related that to his doctor. Kirk is doing something similar relating to Bones. Now, he doesn't go that far, but he does wish he was somewhere else. Because with the stakes this high, what if he's wrong? After all, he's already slipped up. The Romulan captain is clever enough to exploit such a thing. All Bones can offer is a line about the enormity of the universe, yet despite that, we are each unique. Each individual matters, and each individual who dies is irreplaceable. So Spock gives them away unintentionally, and the Romulans move to intercept, but doing so gives Kirk the idea to fire blindly again, presuming that it was the kind of move he'd make, and sure enough he catches the Romulan ship, who responds by dumping a nuke overboard. It's the only way to be sure. Uh-oh. Looks like it wasn't, because the Enterprise was watching for something and managed to avoid the worst of the explosion. And Styles heads down to weapons to assist King Kong with getting them ready for the next round, leaving Uhura to pilot. But unlike Troy, she knows the secret to good piloting is don't hit the gas pedal when you're pointed at something. The Romulans have used this time to get into the neutral zone, which makes this a victory. But Lieutenant Stupid Hat plays into Kirk's hands, wanting to go back for the kill instead of going on home like the commander wants. Well, he steps right into Kirk's trap. There's just one problem. The box is leaking purple stuff, so Styles and Gigantor pass out, and Spock must dare the fumes in order to save the day. To Styles' amazement. Guess he's going to have to cross him off that list of 57 Romulan suspects he has in his briefcase. The Romulan ship is about to explode, but not before Kirk and the commander can face one another in the end.
I regret that we meet in this way. You and I are of a kind. In a different reality, I could have called you friend.
So the ship blows up, the Romulans choosing to go down with the ship out of a sense of duty, and we learn the groom didn't escape the purple cloud, so the bride is now a widow. Kirk comments to her that it doesn't make any sense, but have to believe that it happened for a reason, and likewise speaks to the entirety of this affair, all the people who died, all the destruction that takes place. It's hard to fathom that it could all be for nothing, just two groups struggling over an imaginary line drawn a century ago for a reason few can remember. Balance of Terror would set the tone for DS9 episodes that used war to give an anti-war message, to show the loss in human terms. Their deaths aren't a statistic, they are shown, and the effects of each are shown. Post-episode follow-up, annoying character goes to Lieutenant Silly Hat for his overzealousness in serving the Praetor. Thank goodness his fervor worked in our hero's favor in the end. Final score is 9 out of 10. If you can look past the cheesy Romulan bridge, the episode is an effective working of a character, action, and suspense story that approaches the subject with a greater sobriety and maturity than the franchise will often show down the line.
We finally received an answer from Command Base, sir. They say they'll support whatever decision you have to make.